Tonight we travel back, not to kings and battles, but to the stuff they left behind. The discarded, the broken, the used up. We're going to a place where civilization first learned a fundamental truth. When many people live together, they make a mess. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are standing on the edge of the great city of Ur in southern Mesopotamia, circa 2100 BC. The sun is a hammer on the baked brick walls. The air is thick with the scent of roasting barley, sesame oil, donkey dung, and something else, a sweet, acrid, organic smell you can't quite place. It's the smell of a city working, living, and, yes, decaying. You are surrounded by marvels, the stepped mass of the ziggurat piercing the sky, the murmur of the crowded marketplace, the intricate web of canals bringing life from the mighty Euphrates. But look down. Your sandals aren't resting on pristine earth. They are sinking slightly into a compacted, crumbly layer of everything. Bits of shattered pottery that crunch underfoot. Flecks of ashen charcoal. Fish scales gleaming in the dust. This is the city's first and most constant layer, its own refuse. To live here, to walk these streets, is to walk on a carpet of history's trash. You probably won't survive a week here, by the way. Forget invaders or plagues. A simple cut from a stray potsherd could lead to an infection your ancient immune system has no name for. This is a world where a scraped knee is a potential death sentence, and the very ground you walk on is part of the problem. You take a step forward from the city's main gate, leaving the relative order of the main thoroughfare for a narrower lane between high, windowless walls of mudbrick. This is a residential quarter. The sounds of the main street fade, replaced by the clatter of a loom from a rooftop, the cry of a baby from within a house, and the ever-present buzz of flies. The ground here is interesting. It's not flat dirt. It has a springy, uneven texture. You kneel down, brushing aside the thin layer of dust. Your fingers touch not soil, but a dense, composite material. It's a mosaic of fragments, curved pieces of beige and red pottery, the shattered remains of storage jars, cooking pots, and bowls. There are pockets of grey ash, likely from countless cooking fires and oven cleanings. Tiny animal bones, picked clean and brittle. It's all been compacted by thousands of sandaled feet over years, maybe decades. This isn't an accident or a neglected alley. This is the street itself. The Sumerians, practically to a fault, had a habit of using their own refuse as building material. A mainstream historical fact we see from archaeology is that streets were often deliberately raised and maintained with layers of this compacted trash, creating a stable, if somewhat lumpy, surface that helped with drainage during rare rains. They paved their world with their past. But where does it all start? You straighten up and approach a typical house door, a simple wooden frame in the mud brick wall. From inside, you hear the sounds of domestic life. This is where the story of Sumerian trash truly begins, at the household level. There was no trash day. Every family, every individual, was the first point of sorting in a system that was entirely decentralized. Imagine the daily calculus. A cooking pot cracks beyond repair. Do you toss the sharp shards into the street immediately, where they might injure a donkey's hoof or a child's foot? Or do you set them aside, perhaps to be crushed later for a purpose? A sheep bone, stripped of meat and marrow, still has value. It can be boiled again for a thin broth, or maybe given to the dog. Ash from the hearth isn't just waste, it's a cleaning agent, useful for scouring greasy pots. In a world where every resource is precious, the line between trash and material is blurry, constantly redrawn by need and ingenuity. Historians still argue whether this household-level management was born of brilliant, eco-conscious pragmatism or simply a lack of any other option. Was it a sophisticated understanding of resource cycles, or just people making do? The answer is probably both. They lived within a tight loop of consumption and reuse that would make a modern minimalist weep with admiration, yet they were also trapped by it. The quirky, fringe tidbit here is what they didn't have, a concept of landfill as we know it. There was no away. Away was just a slightly less convenient spot within the city's fabric, a vacant lot, a back alley, the base of the outer wall. Their entire waste management philosophy was one of containment and short-distance relocation, not removal. You'll carry that broken pot, that pile of ashes, only as far as you absolutely must. The city, therefore, grew not just outward, but upward, on a foundation of its own discarded life. As you stand in that dusty, refuse-paved lane, you begin to see the city not as a collection of beautiful buildings, but as a living organism with a metabolism. It consumes clay, water, reeds, wood, animals, grain, and it excretes. What you're standing on is the solidified result of that process. The grandeur of the ziggurat, the wealth of the temple, the buzz of commerce, all of it is built atop, and surrounded by, this humble, crunchy, smelly testament to daily survival. And somewhere, on the very fringe of the city, where the last houses give way to the irrigated fields, that metabolism creates its most dramatic landmark. Not a temple or a palace, but a mountain. A silent, sloping hill of everything the city couldn't use, couldn't repurpose, and simply had to push to the edge. But that's a sight for a little later in our journey. For now, the sun is still high, the flies are still buzzing, and you have a city to explore from the ground up. The street of potsherds eventually leads you to a broader avenue, one that feels more purposeful underfoot. This is a main artery, leading toward the heart of the city and the towering ziggurat. The ground here is harder, more deliberately packed. You see cart tracks pressed deep into the surface, not the work of a single season, but of generations of heavy-laden wagons carrying grain, bricks, or stone. Even here, the composite nature of the street is visible. The material is darker, mixed with more ash and what looks like crushed limestone. It's less haphazard than the residential alley. This feels maintained. Because it had to be. This was the route of processions, of trade, of soldiers. It couldn't be a treacherous morass of loose refuse. So, the city's practical mind found a solution. They turned their most durable waste into infrastructure. You crouch again, letting a slow-moving donkey cart pass by. The driver pays you no mind. You're just another curious soul in a city full of them. Your fingers trace the edge of a particularly large, embedded potsherd. It's not just lying there, it's part of the matrix. This was a deliberate act. When a street began to rut or flood, the solution wasn't to import fresh gravel from miles away. It was to call on the households, or perhaps levy a contribution from the local ward, for broken pottery, bricks, and ash. This material would be spread, wetted down, and pounded into place by laborers or even by the traffic itself. Over time, it created a remarkably stable and well-draining surface. Think of it as the world's first, and most literal, form of recycling concrete. Every jar that shattered in a kitchen, every water jug dropped at the well, every worn-out grinding stone, potentially found its final resting place not in a pit, but in the very road that connected the city. Its useful life as a container was over, but its structural life was just beginning. This creates a fascinating, slightly disorienting sensation as you walk. You are literally treading on decades, perhaps centuries, of compressed history. That pinkish red fleck might be from a painted bowl used in a festival 150 years ago. That black, vitrified lump could be slag from a coppersmith's workshop that burned down during the reign of a king whose name is now only known from a damaged tablet. The city is built on its own past, layer by discarded layer. Archaeologists have a technical, wonderfully descriptive term for this: a tell. The great mounds that mark ancient Near Eastern cities are not natural hills. They are tells, artificial mountains formed by the mudbrick buildings collapsing and being rebuilt, and the streets being resurfaced over millennia. The trash is an integral part of that geological process. It's not separate from the city. It is the city, fossilized. But not everything could be pounded into a street. Some things were too bulky, too smelly, or too inherently useless even to Sumerian pragmatism. For that, the city had another destination. You leave the main avenue, following a smaller path that seems to skirt the inner city walls. The houses here are more modest, packed closer together. The smell changes subtly. The baking bread and wood smoke are still there, but undercut by a heavier, more organic odor, a mix of rotting vegetation, animal manure, and stagnant water. You're heading toward the city's edge, its metabolic boundary. And then you see it. Not a pit, but a slope. A rising, uneven berm that stretches along the inside of the outer defensive wall. This is the midden, the communal dumping ground. It's not a single hole. It's more like a long, low hill made of everything the city couldn't absorb into its daily fabric. From a distance, it looks like a dirty, grayish bank. Up close, it's a chaotic tapestry of discard. You see matted reeds from old roofing, crumbled mud brick from a house repair, mounds of ash and cinders. There are piles of shellfish remains, mussels and clams from the river, their empty shells gleaming in pearly heaps. Animal bones are everywhere, some clearly butchered, others tiny and delicate from birds or fish. And of course, pottery. So much pottery. But here, it's not yet crushed into utility. It's in larger, recognizable pieces. The handle of a jug, the wide rim of a storage vessel. This is the staging area before things either get reused, repurposed, or become part of the landscape. You might see a woman carefully picking through a pile of ash, looking for usable charcoal bits for her brazier. A child might be scavenging for particularly nice-looking oyster shells to use as scoops or toys. This midden isn't just a dump. It's a weird, open-air resource depot. It's where items hover in a state between waste and potential. Historians still argue whether these middens were casually used by anyone or if they fell under some form of neighborhood or ward supervision. Was it a free-for-all, or were there unwritten rules about what went where? The evidence is silent. But the location is telling. It's inside the wall, but on the periphery. This waste was still part of the city's defensive calculus. Throwing it outside the walls would create a health hazard right at your doorstep and, more practically, give attackers a ready-made ramp to scale your defenses. Better to keep it inside, contained, and use its accumulating mass to actually bolster the base of your fortifications. It's a grimly brilliant piece of urban planning. Your garbage literally becomes part of your castle wall. The quirky fringe tidbit here involves what archaeologists sometimes find in these middens that makes them absolutely invaluable: tablets. Not stone monuments, but humble, sun-dried clay tablets, shopping lists, legal contracts, school practice exercises, personal letters. Often, they were discarded when they were no longer needed. These throwaways, preserved by chance in the dry climate and buried in the protective refuse, give us the most intimate, direct voices from the past. The greatest libraries of Sumerian daily life are often found not in palaces, but in their garbage heaps. You stand before the midden, watching a goat pick its way along its base, nibbling at some desiccated vegetable matter. The flies are thicker here, a constant drone. This is the city's shadow, the physical proof of all that consumption. But it's not an end point. From this marginal zone, materials will flow back into the city's life. The bone might become a needle or a toggle. The crushed pottery will find its way into a new street or a potter's mix. The ash will clean a floor. The system is a slow, messy, circular current. And as you turn back toward the bustling center, you realize that to understand a Sumerian city, you must understand its edges, its seams, the places where it dealt with the consequences of its own existence. The ziggurat reaches for the gods, but the midden grounds it in the inescapable, gritty reality of being human together. Leaving the earthy, organic smell of the midden, you move back into the warren of houses. The air grows closer, warmer, trapped between the high mud-brick walls. You're in a wealthier district now. The signs are subtle but clear. The doorways are framed with a bit more wood. Some even have simple carved decorations. The sounds from within are of metal clinking, not just pottery. And then you catch a different scent cutting through the usual urban bouquet. The sharp, tangy, unmistakable smell of ammonia and human waste. It's not overwhelming, but it's a persistent note. You follow it, curious, to a house slightly larger than its neighbors. Peering through an open doorway into a shaded courtyard, you see it. In a back corner, paved with smooth, dark bitumen to make it waterproof, is a small, private marvel, a latrine. It's a simple setup. A raised brick or stone seat with a keyhole-shaped opening, and beneath it, not a deep pit, but a shallow, sloping channel. This is no mere hole in the ground. This is a terminal point in a tiny, private network. The channel connects to a pipe, a real, manufactured, cylindrical clay pipe, that runs under the house's foundation and out into a larger drainage ditch that services the street. You are looking at one of humanity's first serious attempts to conquer the most persistent and dangerous problem of urban density, human waste. For the elite of yore, the solution was engineering and privacy. They had flush toilets. Well, not flush as we know it with a lever and a tank. The flush was a bucket of water or sand, poured manually down the channel after use to carry the waste into the pipe and on its way. But the principle, conveyance and removal via a dedicated, water-sealed conduit, was there over 4,000 years ago. This changes your understanding of the city's sensory landscape instantly. For the vast majority of people, a chamber pot emptied into the street or a midden, or a trip to a designated area near the river or canals, was the reality. The smell was part of life, a background hum. But for the few, technology offered an escape. Stepping into that bitumen-lined room was an act of supreme civilization and segregation. It was a statement: we do not live with our own filth. The waste was made to disappear, swiftly and, relatively, odorlessly, from the intimate sphere of the home. This mainstream historical fact, evidenced by archaeology at sites like Ur and Tel Asmar, reveals a stark social divide in the ancient world. Public health, in its most basic form, was a private luxury. But where did that clay pipe lead? That's the next part of the puzzle. The waste from this house, and perhaps a few of its equally wealthy neighbors, would flow into a larger municipal drain running beneath or alongside the street. These were feats of civic engineering. Some were open channels, lined with bricks and covered with flat stone slabs at intervals for cleaning. Others were true subterranean tunnels, large enough for a person to crawl through for maintenance. They were designed with a gentle slope, using gravity, the oldest and most reliable utility, to pull water and waste toward their ultimate destination, the river or the irrigation canals. The Sumerians understood hydraulics intimately. Their entire civilization was built on controlling water for agriculture. Applying that knowledge to sanitation was a logical, if selective, progression. Historians still argue whether these early source systems were primarily for stormwater drainage, with human waste as a secondary passenger, or were conceived from the start as sanitary sources. Did they build them to keep rain from flooding the streets and just figure, well, while we're at it? The truth is probably a messy combination. A channel that carries away bad water after a storm will also carry away other bad things. The system likely evolved from one purpose to encompass the other, a testament to pragmatic adaptation. The quirky, fringe tidbit here is what they sometimes used to join and seal those precious clay pipes. Bitumen, yes, but also a mortar made from crushed pottery and lime. There it is again. The shattered past, recycled into the infrastructure of a cleaner future. Even their most advanced sanitation technology was built, in part, on yesterday's trash. Now, imagine the contrast. You, as a wealthy merchant, finish your business in your cool, bitumen-lined closet, pour a jug of water down the channel, and hear a satisfying gurgle as it all vanishes. You return to your courtyard, perhaps to discuss business with a trader from Dilmun. Meanwhile, a porter's family 2 streets over uses a ceramic pot in the corner of their single room, which is later emptied into the open drain that runs past their front door, the same drain that carries the rainwater and the neighborhood's waste. The two systems, the private, pressurized luxury and the public, gravity-fed reality, existed side by side, a perfect metaphor for Sumerian society itself. The technological breakthrough was real, but its benefits were not for the commons. It was a tool for managing the discomfort of the elite, not for solving the city's health crisis. This brings a slightly cynical smile. The great ziggurat, the temple bureaucracy, the written word, the wheel, all these world-changing inventions sprang from this culture. And so did the segregated soul. It's a reminder that innovation is rarely about pure altruism. It's often about solving a problem for the person who can afford the solution. Yet, you can't help but admire the simple elegance of that clay pipe. It's hand-thrown, slightly irregular, but it works. It represents a moment where humanity looked at its own biological reality and said, there must be a better way than just living in it. They found one, for a price. And as you leave the quiet luxury of that wealthy home, stepping back into the sun-baked, smell-rich public world, you carry with you the knowledge that even here, at civilization's dawn, the quest for cleanliness and order was already a commodity, flowing quietly beneath the feet of the masses. The gurgle of that private drain is still a ghost sound in your mind as you step back into the full, unfiltered reality of the city's streets. The wealthy might have engineered an escape, but for everyone else, the relationship with waste was a daily, intimate, and multisensory affair. You pause in a small square where several alleys converge. It's not a grand plaza, just a widening in the urban fabric, a place where people naturally stop, talk, and where a public well likely stands. You close your eyes for a moment and just breathe. This is the smell of Sumerian success. It's not a single odor, but a loud, complex bouquet that tells the story of 5,000 people living in very close quarters. The first note is wood smoke, sharp, resinous, and comforting. It's from 100 cooking fires, from the baker's oven on the corner, from the kill of the potter down the lane. Under that is the warm, yeasty scent of baking barley bread, the staple of life. Then comes the pungent, earthy smell of animal dung, donkeys, sheep, goats, drying in cakes on walls or already burning as slow, smelly fuel in a brazier. There's the metallic tang of the nearby coppersmith's workshop, the sour smell of fermenting beer from a household vat, the oily aroma of sesame being pressed. And woven through it all, the base note, the foundation of the urban scent, decay. It's the sweet rot smell of organic refuse in a midden just around the corner. It's the stale, standing water smell from an open drainage channel that hasn't seen recent rain. It's the faint, ever-present ammonia tang from chamber pots recently emptied. This is the olfactory landscape, and to a Sumerian, it wasn't stink. It was the smell of home, of commerce, of life. It was the smell of safety in numbers, a small price to pay for the protection of the city walls and the abundance of the market. Your modern nose would recoil, labeling it all pollution or filth. But to them, It was simply the ambient data of existence, as natural as the scent of pine is to a forester. This sensory immersion forces you to reconsider the idea of cleanliness. Our modern concept, tied to sterility and the absence of smell, didn't exist. Cleanliness was about social and ritual order, not bacteriological count. You kept your person clean. Bathing in the river or with a sponge and basin was common, a necessity in the dust and heat. You kept your clothes clean. You swept the packed earth floor of your house. But the street outside? That was a different category. It was a shade, transitional space, a utility corridor. Its state was a communal concern, but not an individual one in the same way. Tossing your household ash into the street wasn't littering, it was contributing to the next resurfacing project. The mainstream historical fact, understood from texts and archaeology, is that there was a clear spatial hierarchy of purity. The innermost, most sacred spaces, the cellar of the temple where the god's statue resided, had to be ritually spotless. The home was a place of relative order. The street was a practical zone. The city wall and the middens were the liminal, messy boundaries. Different rules applied to each circle. Now, let's follow a typical discard on its journey. You see a woman emerge from a doorway with a large, cracked platter. It's too badly broken to mend with bitumen or reed ties. She doesn't walk toward the distant midden. Instead, she steps just outside her door, looks up and down the alley, and with a practiced motion, tosses the large shards against the base of the opposite wall. Crunch. They join a small, existing pile there, a hyperlocal, micromidden for her immediate neighborhood. This is the first, most convenient filter. Heavy, bulky, inert things like pottery often didn't travel far. They became part of the local streetscape immediately, a kind of territorial marker. Later, when the alley became too uneven or mucky, someone, but who? We'll get to that, would perhaps gather these piles, crush the shards further, and use them to level the surface. The waste never left the neighborhood, it just changed form and function. Historians still argue whether this practice was born of pure convenience or if it reflected a deeper, almost biological understanding of urban metabolism, that waste should be processed and reincorporated as close to its point of origin as possible. Was it laziness, or a primitive, brilliant circular economy? The line is impossibly thin. The quirky fringe tidbit that brings this to life involves animal pens. Many families kept a goat or a few chickens in a small courtyard. Their manure wasn't just waste, it was a resource pile. But it also attracted flies and vermin. The solution? Often, the pen was deliberately placed directly over or next to the household's main waste disposal area. The animals would root through the fresh discards, eating food scraps, and their trampling and droppings would help compact and break down the pile. It was an integrated, if pungent, home recycling and waste processing unit. The city didn't have a sanitation department. Each household was its own tiny, self-regulating ecosystem. So you stand in that square, breathing in the city. The smell is no longer just an assault, it's a language. The wood smoke says people are cooking, working, living. The dung says there are animals, wealth on the hoof. The decay says there is enough surplus to have waste at all. In a world of scarcity, a bad smell could, paradoxically, be a sign of abundance. It's a completely alien way of thinking to us, who spend billions to make our waste invisible and odorless. The Sumerians lived with theirs, negotiated with it, and even used it as a building block of their world. Their tolerance wasn't ignorance. It was a different kind of knowledge, a hard-won accommodation with the realities of congregated life. They built ziggurats that touched the sky, but they never forgot that civilization, in the end, is always built from the ground up, and that ground was often messy. The sound of that shattering platter still echoes in the narrow alley as you turn your attention from the active disposal to the materials themselves. What, exactly, filled those micromiddens and lined those streets? It's time to get our hands metaphorically dirty and sift through a typical Sumerian household's daily discard. Imagine you are standing by that same doorway at the end of the day. The family inside has finished their evening meal of barley porridge, fish from the canal, and onions. The fire is banked. Now comes the quiet ritual of sorting the day's leavings. First, the organic remains. Fish bones and heads, onion skins, the tough stems of greens. These aren't thrown into the street immediately. In a world without casual waste, they are scrutinized. The fish heads and bones might go into a pot of water left by the fire overnight to make a weak, nutritious stock for tomorrow's pottage. The vegetable matter might be set aside for the goat in the courtyard. What's truly inedible, say, date pits or the shells of terebinth nuts, might be tossed into the household hearth to burn as supplemental fuel, adding their brief, smoky heat to the evening. Ash, as you've learned, is never just waste. Tomorrow, it will be used to scrub the cooking pots clean or to sprinkle on the floor to absorb spills and odors before sweeping. The organic stream is a slow, careful trickle of reuse, not a torrent of disposal. Next, the inorganic. The broken platter was the big-ticket item. But smaller pottery shards are constant, a chipped cup, a worn-out grindstone for milling grain. These are collected in a basket or a corner of the courtyard. Their fate is dual. Some will be used as is. A large, curved shard makes an excellent scoop for dry goods or a small shovel for ash. A smooth, flat piece can be a scraping tool or a primitive notepad for marking tallies with a bit of charcoal. But many are destined for the great recycler, the street. When the basket is full, or when the lane outside develops a particularly troublesome puddle, these shards will be committed to public works, becoming part of the urban substrate. There's also debris from manufacturing, flint napping flakes from a toolmaker, bits of discarded copper slag. These are valuable in their own right and are often hoarded by craftsmen for future use or sale. Nothing with potential utility escapes scrutiny. This is where we encounter a mainstream historical fact that underpins this whole system, the economy of scarcity. Every material in Sumer was the product of immense human labor. Clay had to be dug, cleaned, and wedged. Reeds had to be harvested from the marshes. Metal was fantastically rare and hard-won. Wood was imported from distant mountains. This labor investment imbued objects with a value we struggle to comprehend. To discard something usable wasn't just messy, it was profligate, almost sinful. It represented a failure of imagination and thrift. The entire culture was wired to see potential, not waste. A torn reed mat becomes stuffing for a wall or fuel. A worn-out leather sandal is cut into thongs or patches. The end of an object's primary life was merely the beginning of its secondary, tertiary, or even quaternary usefulness. Historians still argue whether this hyper-efficient reuse was driven more by cultural religious values of thrift and respect for materials, or by pure, unrelenting economic necessity. Did they do it because it was the right way to live, or because the alternative was going without? The answer, frustratingly, is both, inseparably fused. Their pragmatism was their philosophy. The quirky, fringe tidbit that illustrates this mindset perfectly involves a substance you'd least expect to be recycled: crocodile dung. Now, the Mesopotamian crocodile was a rare creature of the far southern marshes, but the principle applies to other animal wastes. While commonly used as fuel when dried, some fringe theories, and a few cryptic texts, suggest it may also have been experimented with as a component in early plaster or mudbrick mixtures, perhaps for its fibrous, binding quality. Whether true or not, the very idea captures the spirit. If a thing exists, it must have a use. Everything is a resource waiting for its context. So, as night falls over Ur and lamps of sesame oil begin to glow in doorways, the day's metabolic cycle completes. The city has consumed food, water, fuel. And it has excreted bones, ash, shards. But unlike a biological body, its excretion isn't a final, expelled waste product. It's a redistribution of resources. The waste from one process, cooking, becomes the input for another, cleaning, building. The broken tool becomes raw material for the road. It's a slow, low-tech, but remarkably closed-loop system. There is no away. There is only elsewhere and otherwise. As you listen to the sounds of the city settling, the last cries of vendors, the scraping of a broom across a floor, the low conversation from a rooftop, you understand that the silence of the night isn't just an absence of noise. It's the pause in the constant, quiet work of transformation, where yesterday's discarded plate begins its long, slow journey toward becoming part of tomorrow's road, all without ever leaving the neighborhood that created it. That basket of broken pottery by the doorway, destined for the street or the potter's yard, leads us to a curious and brilliant secret of Sumerian craft. You leave the residential quarter as dawn breaks, following the sound of a rhythmic thumping and the smell of a hot kiln. You've arrived at the potter's workshop, a bustling open-air space on the city's periphery, near both the source of clay and the main middens. Here, you'll witness one of the most perfect, silent recycling loops of the ancient world. The potter, his arms coated in gray slurry up to the elbows, isn't just working with fresh river clay. Watch him as he prepares his batch. He takes the wet, new clay and begins kneading into it a generous amount of grit. This isn't sand. It's something more specific. He reaches into a pile of what looks like coarse, reddish powder beside his wheel. This is grog. You lean closer. Grog is crushed, pre-fired pottery. It is, quite literally, yesterday's dishes, ground back into dust. This is the potter's secret ingredient, and its purpose is engineering genius. Fresh, pure clay is temperamental. When it dries and is fired, it shrinks significantly and unevenly, leading to cracks and warping. It can also explode in the kiln if trapped moisture turns to steam too quickly. But add grog, an inert, already fired material, and you change the game. The grog particles reduce overall shrinkage, provide structural strength like aggregate in concrete, and create tiny channels that allow moisture and gases to escape during firing. The result? Stronger, more durable, more reliable pots. It's a masterstroke of materials science, discovered through millennia of trial and error. Now, trace the loop. A water jar cracks in a household. It's too broken for repair. Rather than going straight to the street, it might be saved for the potter. He or a helper collects such shards, breaks them down further with a hammerstone, and grinds them into a consistent grit. This grog is then mixed with the new clay dug from the riverbank. The mixture is thrown on the wheel, forming a new jar. That jar is fired, sold, used, and one day, it too will break. Its shards will be collected, crushed, and become the grog for a future generation of pottery. The object is immortal, not in form, but in substance. Its material essence cycles through use after use, century after century. This is a mainstream historical fact confirmed by petrographic analysis of ancient pottery, which can identify the mineral signature of the grog used. The past is physically embedded within every new vessel. But where did the potter get his raw material, the grog? Some certainly came from his own failed firings, warped pots or kiln accidents. But a huge amount would have been scavenged. This is where the city's waste stream becomes a supply chain. Children might be paid a few grains of barley to collect particularly large shards from middens or street piles. The potter himself might make regular rounds, trading a small, simple bowl for a basket of broken pottery. The middens weren't just dumps, they were raw material quarries. The quirky, fringe tidbit here involves the possibility of specialization. Could there have been a lowly, unrecorded trade, a shard gatherer or a grog maker, who did the messy work of collection and primary crushing for multiple potters? We have no written record of such a job title, but the economy of scale suggests it's plausible. Someone was turning the city's ceramic skeleton back into usable flesh. Historians still argue whether the use of grog was a deliberate, understood technological choice. This makes the pot stronger, or a traditional practice born of observation. My grandfather always added crushed pots, so I do too. The scientific principle behind it, the reduction of shrinkage and thermal stress, is sound, but did they comprehend the why? Most likely, they knew it worked, and that was enough. The practice reveals a deep, intuitive understanding of their materials. They saw not trash and clay, but two parts of a single continuum. The broken object was not an end, it was a phase. Watching the potter's hands, slick with mud, pull a perfect, grog-speckled cylinder from the spinning wheel, you see the city's metabolism in its purest form. Consumption, discard, collection, transformation, rebirth. It's a slower, dirtier version of our modern glass or metal recycling, but the conceptual leap is identical. Nothing is truly created or destroyed, it is merely reconfigured. The plate that held your lamb and onions 200 years ago might, in a crushed and reborn form, be holding the water for your descendants' ritual ablutions today. The past is not a foreign country here. It is the literal bedrock of the present, ground fine and spun back into existence on a humming wheel. As the new pot is set aside to dry, its surface a constellation of tiny, recycled stars, you realize that in Sumer, even the most humble broken thing carried within it the seed of its own future. The potters will stop spinning, and with the grog now part of a new vessel, we must ask a larger, more bureaucratic question. In a city of thousands, with streets to maintain and middens accumulating, who was in charge? Who organized it? You leave the earthy chaos of the workshop and walk toward the administrative heart of the city, near the temple precinct. Here, in cool, dark rooms lit by narrow windows high in the walls, scribes bend over damp clay tablets, their reed styli moving with quick, practiced jabs. This is where the city's memory lives, in lists of grain, records of sheep, accounts of beer and wool for temple workers. This is where you would expect to find, if it existed, the job title, trash gatherer. You scan the imaginary ledger in your mind. You see entries for Ingar, farmer, Simag, smith, Naggar, carpenter, Asgab, leatherworker. You see officials like the Ugula, overseer, and the Sangha, temple administrator. But you search in vain for a title like Lukiri Harake, or man of the garbage removal. It simply isn't there as a distinct, formal profession in the vast corpus of cuneiform administrative texts we've uncovered. This absence is deafening. It suggests that waste management, as a centralized, municipal service, did not exist in Sumer. There was no department of sanitation, no city-funded crew making rounds. The removal of household refuse was not considered a public burden in the way that maintaining the defensive walls or the temple canals was. So, if it wasn't an official's job, whose job was it? The answer points relentlessly back to the household and the individual. The primary responsibility for dealing with your own waste stopped at your doorstep, literally. You disposed of your ash, your broken pots, your organic scraps in the manner we've seen: reuse, repurpose, or deposit in the immediate vicinity. The system was a vast network of millions of individual, micro-decisions, not a top-down plan. Street maintenance, when it happened, was likely an ad hoc, communal effort. If a lane became impassable, The families living on it might organize a day to clear the worst of the piles, crush the shards, and re-level the surface. It was neighborhood pragmatism, not civic policy. This leads us to a mainstream historical fact about the nature of early states. Their priorities were extraction and monument building, not public welfare. The temple and palace bureaucracies were brilliant at recording and redistributing agricultural surplus, organizing labor for massive construction projects, ziggurats, walls, canals, and managing craft production for the elite. They were engines of concentration, amassing wealth and labor for grand purposes. The diffuse, daily, unglamorous problem of street filth was beneath their notice, unless it directly impeded those grand purposes, like blocking a processional route. The city's government managed the macroeconomy of grain and gods. The microeconomy of dirt and discard was left to the people. Historians still argue whether this lack of formal service was a failing of the Sumerian state or a rational adaptation to their circumstances. Was it a blind spot in their urban planning, or did they simply operate on a model where public space was a shared responsibility, not a city-maintained amenity? The debate hinges on our own modern expectations. We assume a functioning city must have a trash collection service. The Sumerians clearly did not share that assumption. Their social contract was different. You had the right to live within the walls and trade in the market. In return, you had the responsibility to manage your own footprint. The quirky, fringe tidbit that emerges from this is the concept of the ghost profession. While there was no official trash man, certain existing jobs almost certainly dealt with waste as a secondary function. The corvée labour conscripted to clean irrigation canals might also be told to clear a blocked city drain. The humble porter with his donkey cart, who moved goods, might be hired privately to haul away the debris from a house demolition. The role existed in practice, but it was invisible in the official record, masked by more generic job titles. As you stand in the imagined silence of the archive, the only sound the faint scratching of styli, you understand the city's organization a little better. It was a place of stunning hierarchical order in some realms, religion, law, large-scale agriculture, and neo-anarchic self-reliance in others, daily sanitation, minor street repair. This duality is key. The strength of the state was not in providing services, but in providing structure within which individuals could solve their own problems. The city didn't take your trash away. It gave you a place, a midden, a street, a network of neighbors, where you could put it. It was a framework, not a service. And in that framework, everyone, from the poorest porter to the wealthiest merchant, was ultimately their own sanitation worker, making silent, daily pacts with their neighbors about where the line of acceptable mess was drawn. The city's cleanliness was a continuous, unspoken negotiation, not an ordinance. The absence of the official trash gatherer in the temple ledgers forces us to look for our ghost profession in the bustling, dusty reality of the streets. Who, in the daily flow of labor, might have waste as part of their unspoken portfolio. Your eyes settle on a figure you've passed a dozen times without truly seeing, the porter. He's a ubiquitous presence, a human engine of the city's micrologistics. You see him now, muscles straining under a sun-baked tan, guiding a heavy, two-wheeled wooden cart down a sloping lane. The cart is piled high with rough, straw-packed bricks. He's heading toward a new construction site near the temple. This is his stated job, moving things from where they are to where they are needed. Bricks, timber, sacks of grain, blocks of stone. But follow him at the end of his day. The bricks are delivered. He's paid in barley or a few small copper rings. His cart is empty. Now, he becomes a potential solution in search of a problem. As he guides the empty cart back through the residential quarters, might a homeowner flag him down? You there? For a half measure of barley, can you take this pile of rubble from my collapsed wall shelf to the midden by the eastern gate? The porter nods. It's extra income. He and his donkey load the broken mud brick and plaster, along with whatever household refuse was mixed in, and haul it away. In this moment, he is a trash remover. His job title hasn't changed. He's still a porter, Kaskal in Sumerian, literally road goer. But his function in that moment is entirely about waste. This is how the system likely worked, through the flexible, opportunistic labor of generic haulers, not specialized sanitation workers. Now, consider the nature of his cargo. It's not neatly bagged garbage. It's loose, dusty, sometimes wet, often smelly. His cart isn't sealed, it's an open platform. As he trudges through the city, bits of his load, a trickle of dirt, a fragment of pottery, might spill onto the street. In a way, he's not just removing waste, he's also redistributing it along his route in minute quantities. His journey from a wealthy district's renovation project to a distant midden might leave a faint, almost invisible trail of debris, a tiny contribution to the street's ever-growing stratum. He is both the solution to a localized mess and a source of a diffuse, citywide one. This brings us to a mainstream historical fact about urban labor. In early cities, job roles were often broad and fluid, not narrow and specialized. A man might be a farmer for most of the year, a brickmaker during the annual corvée labor period, and an occasional porter for hire when he needed extra income. His identity was tied more to his household and his patron than to a single trade. The porter who moved bricks one day might move dung the next, or freshly caught fish the day after that. The cart and the donkey were the constants. The cargo was variable. Therefore, to ask who handled the trash is to slightly miss the point. The better question is, what available labor could be directed to a waste problem, and how was it paid for? The answer was, almost any laborer with a cart or strong shoulders, paid privately by the person with the problem. Historians still argue whether this kind of private hire waste removal was common or only for exceptional circumstances. Major cleanouts, construction debris, or the wealthy outsourcing a chore. Was the average family saving up their barley to hire a porter for their broken pots, or did they just handle it themselves over shorter distances? The scale of the middens suggests a lot of material was moved, but whether it was moved professionally or by amateurs with hand baskets is a mystery lost to the dust. The quirky, fringe tidbit that adds color to this is the possibility of informal tipping. Just as a wealthy household might have a regular porter on retainer for various tasks, they might also have an understanding with a particular laborer to regularly clear a designated pile by their service entrance. This wouldn't be a city contract. It would be a personal, patronage arrangement, another thread in the complex web of social obligation that held the city together. The waste was removed not because of a law, but because of a relationship. So you watch the porter disappear around a corner, his empty cart now rattling lightly over the uneven street. He is a cipher. He could be carrying anything, or nothing. His role in the city's waste stream is contingent, temporary, and utterly unrecorded. Yet, he is likely one of the key mechanisms by which heavier, bulkier refuse made the longer journey from the heart of the city to its fringes. He represents the adaptive, entrepreneurial spirit that filled the gaps left by the absent state. The city didn't need a sanitation department as long as there were hungry men with carts and a willingness to get their hands dirty for a day's wages. In this light, the streets of yore were not just paved with pottery. They were maintained by a hidden economy of barter and sweat, where the removal of yesterday's mess was simply another commodity to be traded, another small negotiation in the endless, quiet business of urban life. The porter's cart fades from view, leaving you in a neighborhood that feels different. The air is clearer, the sounds more measured. You've walked toward the city's spiritual center, and the architecture reflects it. The walls are higher, the gates more imposing. You pass through an entryway into a broad, open courtyard paved with finely fitted limestone slabs. This is the temple precinct. And here, at last, you find a cleaner. Not a ghost profession, but a real, attested one. He is the temple sweeper, and his broom, a bundle of reeds tied to a stick, is moving in slow, ritualistic arcs across the sacred stones. His job is not about public health, it is about ritual purity. In the Sumerian worldview, dirt and disorder were not just physical problems, they were spiritual threats. Chaos and evil could manifest as literal filth, especially in the dwelling place of the god. The temple was the axis of the universe, the link between heaven and earth. Its cleanliness was a metaphysical necessity. So, while the city streets outside might be a practical, messy compromise, the temple courtyards and inner chambers had to be immaculate. This sweeper is a low-level temple employee, likely fed from the temple's grain stores. His duty is explicit and constant: to remove any physical impurity, dust, leaves, animal droppings, the stray footprint of mud, from this hallowed ground. He is, in a sense, the only certified municipal cleaner in the entire city, and his jurisdiction ends at the temple gate. This presents a stark, almost ironic contrast. The one place with a dedicated, paid sanitation worker is the place that needs it least from a hygienic perspective. It's not a hub of organic waste or dense habitation. It's a controlled, ceremonial space. Yet, it receives a level of cleaning attention that the crowded residential quarters could only dream of. This mainstream historical fact, gleaned from administrative texts that list temple personnel and their rations, highlights the primacy of the sacred over the secular in Sumerian urban management. Order was imposed first for the gods, not for the people. The well-being of the city was believed to flow from the pleasure of its deity, and a clean temple was essential for that pleasure. Public health, as a concept, was a byproduct of divine favor, not a civic goal in itself. Watch the sweeper work. His movements are unhurried, thorough. He doesn't just push debris into a corner, he gathers it into a small pile on a palm frond mat. He will then carry it, not to a midden inside the precinct, but outside the walls, banishing it from the sacred zone entirely. The impurity must be removed completely, not just relocated within the holy area. This is a key distinction. In the secular city, waste was shuffled around, repurposed, contained. In the temple, it was exiled. The different treatment reveals the two parallel systems operating in a spiritual system of absolute purity for the divine, and a practical system of managed mess for the human. Historians still argue whether the temple's obsession with ritual cleanliness had any trickle-down effect on secular attitudes. Did seeing the immaculate temple courtyards make people wish their own streets were cleaner? Or did it reinforce the idea that such spotlessness was only appropriate for the gods? There's no evidence of public campaigns for cleaner streets inspired by temple practices. The two realms seem to have existed in separate conceptual boxes. The quirky, fringe tidbit that connects them is the use of purification rituals that involved actual cleaning agents. Priests undergoing ritual purification might wash with a solution of water and noga, a type of alkali salt, essentially an early soap. This substance, used for spiritual cleansing, was also a practical detergent. The knowledge of cleaning chemistry existed in the sacred sphere, but its application remained largely there. The technology for a cleaner city existed in the temple storerooms. The will to deploy it citywide did not. As you stand in the hushed courtyard, watching the sweeper's monotonous, vital work, you feel the profound disconnect. Just a 10-minute walk away, families are navigating alleys paved with broken lives, breathing air thick with the byproducts of existence. Here, a man is paid to ensure not a single stray leaf remains on the god's doorstep. It's a powerful metaphor for the priorities of early civilization. Immense resources and attention focused on the symbolic center, while the lived experience of the periphery was left to the chaotic, beautiful, and dirty processes of human adaptation. The temple's cleanliness was a statement of control over the cosmos. The city's mess was the evidence of life stubbornly, messily, thriving within that cosmos. The sweeper finishes his section, gathers his mat, and walks solemnly toward the gate, carrying his small burden of profane dust back into the world it came from. His job is complete. The city's job, however, is never done. The temple sweeper carries his little pile of sacred dust out the gate, back into the realm of the mundane and the managed mess. His work is constant, but it's a holding action against nature. For the city as a whole, the tide of refuse was a seasonal force, ebbing and flowing with the rhythm of life, weather, and collective energy. There were moments when the slow, daily negotiation broke down, when the middens crept too close, when the drains clogged catastrophically, when the streets became more pit than path. Then, something more coordinated had to happen. Not a daily service, but a seasonal purge. Imagine it's early spring. The barley harvest is in, the great floodwaters of the Euphrates are receding, and there's a lull before the punishing heat of summer. The city's leaders, perhaps the NC, city ruler, or the temple administrators, proclaim a cleanup. It's not framed as Sanitation Day. It might be tied to a religious festival, a preparation for the new year, Akitu, or simply a practical necessity before the streets turn to dust bowls. The call goes out, a corvée labor duty is levied. Every household must contribute a worker for a day or two, or face a fine in barley. This is how the Sumerians built their ziggurats and dug their canals, through organized, mass communal labor. The same principle applied to the city's own body. On the appointed morning, your neighborhood alley transforms. Instead of individual families discreetly tossing shards, a dozen men and women with baskets, mats, and wooden scrapers converge. There's a sense of shared purpose, even festivity. It's hard, dirty work, but it's communal. You join in. Your job is to clear the worst of the organic muck from the central drain, a sludgy combination of ash, animal waste, and decomposed matter that has slowed the runoff to a trickle. You shovel it into baskets. Others are breaking up the larger piles of pottery and brick rubble with hammers, crushing them into usable aggregate. A team with a donkey cart is loading the non-reusable waste, the truly rotten, the hopelessly mixed, for a final journey to the main midden at the city's edge. For a brief, intense period, the neighborhood is an open-air workshop dedicated to its own rehabilitation. This is a mainstream historical fact inferred from the sheer scale of urban maintenance required and the known Sumerian practice of communal labor for public works. While no tablet explicitly says Tuesday, clean the street of the oil presses, the system of labor obligations was the only tool powerful enough to accomplish such a task. The cleanup was episodic, not continuous. It was a reset, bringing the urban environment back from the brink of dysfunction to a state of tolerable, workable mess. After the labor, the freshly cleared and leveled street might even get a sprinkling of clean water to settle the dust, a small luxury that would last perhaps an hour in the sun. Historians still argue whether these cleanups were reactive, only when things got truly bad, or proactive, a regular, calendared event tied to the seasons. Given the variable evidence and the fact that priorities would shift with droughts, wars, or pestilence, they were likely more reactive. The city cleaned itself when the mess became a crisis that impeded commerce, military movement, or the ruling elite's comfort. The quirky, fringe tidbit that brings this to life is the potential role of festival food. During a community cleanup tied to a festival, the temple or palace might provide a communal meal for the workers, extra rations of beer and bread. The act of cleaning the city's physical body was thus nourished by the city's stored surplus, creating a literal metabolic loop, The grain from the storehouses fuels the labor that clears the waste, making space for the next harvest's bounty to enter the city. Work, celebration, and necessity were braided together. As the day wanes, your alley looks different. Not clean in a modern sense, but functional. The drain runs clear. The worst piles are gone. The street surface is more even. There's a palpable sense of accomplishment and temporary order. But even as you wipe the sweat from your brow, you know this is not a permanent victory. The very next day, ash will drift from a doorway, a new pot will crack, an animal will leave its droppings. The slow accumulation will begin anew. The seasonal purge was not a solution, but a cyclical negotiation with entropy. It acknowledged that the city's mess was a force of nature, like the flooding river, that required periodic, collective effort to channel and control. It was the community reminding itself that while individual disposal was a private act, the consequence of all those acts was a shared environment that required shared responsibility, however briefly that responsibility was officially enforced. You look down the now cleared lane, and for a moment, you can almost see the ghost of the straight, purposeful processional way it might once have been, before life, in all its messy glory, reclaimed it. The sweat of the communal cleanup has dried, the temporarily ordered streets once again accepting the gentle, constant rain of daily life. As night falls deeply over you, a different kind of reality sets in. The practical management of waste by day gives way to the psychological and supernatural landscape it inhabits by night. You're standing at the edge of a residential quarter, looking toward the great sloping bulk of the main midden, silhouetted against the starry sky. In the daylight, it was a resource depot, a quarry of grog, a place of scavenging and utility. Now, under the moon, it transforms. It is no longer just a pile of refuse. It is a liminal space, a borderland between the ordered city and the chaotic wild, between the community of the living and the domain of unseen forces. To the Sumerian mind, places of decay and abandonment were naturally attractive to malignant spirits. The Rabisu was one such demon, a lurker, a croucher, believed to wait in unseen corners, in ruins, and yes, in piles of filth, ready to ambush the unwary. The midden, with its odors of death and decay, its strange half-shapes in the dim light, was a perfect haunt. This wasn't mere superstition, it was a folk hygiene protocol encoded in myth. The stories and warnings served a vital function. They kept people, especially children, away from these hazardous places after dark. Why post a guard by the trash heap when a good ghost story does the job for free? The fear of the Rabisu was, in a way, the city's first and most effective public health advisory regarding its own waste zones. Here there be danger. This leads us to a mainstream historical fact about ancient worldviews. There was no firm line between the physical and the spiritual causes of illness. A fever might be caused by a miasma, bad air, from rotting matter, but that miasma itself could be the breath of a demon or the consequence of divine displeasure. Therefore, a place that was physically unhealthy, teeming with bacteria, parasites, and toxins, was ipso facto spiritually dangerous. The midden was a nexus of both threats. The stories about demons were a powerful, culturally coherent way of understanding and marking very real physical peril. You didn't avoid the middens at night just because you were scared of ghosts. You avoided them because your culture's entire framework for understanding danger told you that the two were inseparable. Now, walk with that understanding. The cheerful, scavenging children are gone. The woman picking through ash has returned home. The only sounds are the distant bark of a dog and the rustle of the wind over the loose, dry detritus. Your own modern mind knows the risks are tetanus, rat-borne disease, or a twisted ankle. But in the skin of an ancient inhabitant, your senses are primed for a different kind of threat. That odd, half-buried shape isn't a broken statue. It's a Rabisu frozen in the act of rising. The scuttling sound isn't a beetle, it's the claw of something unspeakable. The midden is no longer a place of things, but of potentialities, most of them menacing. This psychological barrier was as real as any city wall. It defined the safe zone of habitation and cast the waste zones beyond the pale of normal life, making their very existence easier to tolerate by demonizing them. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were universally held or varied by class and education. Did the high priest, versed in the precise rituals to exorcise demons, truly fear the midden demon, or did he see it as a useful metaphor to control the populace? Did the pragmatic potter, who collected shards there by day, scoff at the tales at night? The line between belief and utility is impossibly blurred. The quirky, fringe tidbit that emerges from this shadowy realm is the concept of waste as a curse vector. In Mesopotamian magic, if you wanted to harm an enemy, you might bury a cursed figurine of them in a filthy, despised place, a midden or a latrine, to subject their spiritual essence to corruption and decay. The waste zone wasn't just haunted, it was actively polluting on a magical level. This meant that the act of discarding something could, in extreme cases, be an act of sorcery. Even trash could be weaponized. So you stand in the darkness, the clean, orderly fear of the temple precinct a world away. Here, fear is organic, tangled, and pungent. The city's brilliant, pragmatic daily systems of reuse and recycling have their counterweight in the nocturnal mythology of contamination and terror. The same pile that provides grog for tomorrow's pot provides a home for tonight's phantom. This duality is essential to understanding the Sumerian mind. They were relentless pragmatists, but their pragmatism was wrapped in a cosmos alive with intention and danger. They managed their waste with one hand, while with the other, they painted spiritual warnings around it. They lived in a constant, conscious negotiation not just with the physical mess, but with the spectral dread it invited. And as a cold night wind kicks up a tiny whirlwind of dust and chaff from the midden's crest, you feel it too, the instinctive pull to step back, to return to the circle of lamplight and human company, leaving the demons of the dump to their dark and silent kingdom. The spectral chill of the midden still lingers as you turn your focus from the supernatural fears to the tangible, engineered solutions that tried to combat the very real, physical threats. We've seen the private luxury of the bitumen-lined latrine. But what about the larger, municipal-scale infrastructure? You make your way to a section of the city where excavation is ongoing, a deep, narrow trench cut by modern archaeologists, but in your mind's eye, you see it as it was, an open, brick-lined channel being cleaned by laborers. This is the public drain, the unsung, subterranean hero of urban survival. And its most elegant component? The humble, beautiful clay pipe. Forget modern PVC. The Sumerian saw pipe was a work of artisan craft. Picture a cylinder of terracotta, about the length of your forearm and as wide as a large grapefruit. But it's not just a tube. Its genius is in the connection. One end is tapered slightly, the other end is flared, like a bell. You take one pipe, and you insert its tapered end into the flared end of the next. The fit is snug, not perfect, but it creates a channel. The joints might be sealed with bitumen or that mortar of crushed pottery and lime. These pipes were laid with a careful, gentle slope, following the natural incline of the city's terrain, guiding wastewater from higher ground to lower, from residential quarters toward the river or irrigation canals. They were the city's hidden veins, carrying away its liquid metabolic waste. This technology wasn't for every street. It was for the important ones, the routes leading to the temple, the main arteries of trade, the districts of the wealthy. In other areas, open channels sufficed. But where they were used, they represent a stunning leap in civil engineering. They understood pressure, gravity, and the need for a smooth interior to prevent clogs. These weren't just holes in the ground. They were manufactured, standardized components of an urban system. A mainstream historical fact, evidenced by finds at sites like Ishnuna and Ur, is that some of these early pipelines were even designed with inspection shafts, cesspits or larger chambers at intervals where the flow could be checked and blockages cleared. This shows foresight. They were building systems meant to last and be maintained. Now, imagine the soundscape around this infrastructure. In a wealthy home with a private latrine, the sound was a discreet pour and a distant gurgle. Here, at a public channel, the sound is more constant. During a rainstorm, it becomes a rushing torrent, a sign the system is working. In the dry season, it might be a sluggish trickle, carrying the daily contributions from the houses that empty their waste pots into it. The smell near these outlets is, of course, potent. But the very existence of the channel means the waste is moving, not stagnating. It is being carried from the dense heart of the city to the outskirts, where the river's larger volume can dilute it. It's a primitive form of sewage treatment, dilution as solution. Historians still argue whether the primary driver for this sophisticated drainage was stormwater management or sanitation. Did they build these elegant pipes to prevent their streets from turning into lakes during the rainy season, and the sanitary benefit was a happy accident? Or did the health crisis of concentrated human waste become dire enough to inspire dedicated infrastructure? The evidence points to stormwater as the initial impetus, with sanitary functions being incorporated as the systems evolved. The quirky, fringe tidbit that adds a layer of sophistication is the discovery, in some elite complexes, of pipes made not just of clay, but of hollowed-out limestone blocks, perfectly squared and joined. This was the pinnacle of the technology, a permanent, almost monumental approach to the problem of waste removal. It was architecture for effluent, a testament to how seriously the elite took the problem of moving unseen, unwanted things away from their sphere. Standing by the trench, you can almost hear the ancient flow. This network of clay and stone was the closest thing Sumerian cities had to an immune system. It was a mechanical response to the biological fact of 5,000 people digesting and excreting in close proximity. It didn't solve the health problems, far from it, but it mitigated the worst of them. It was a declaration that while solid waste might be reused, repurposed, or piled up, liquid waste was a problem of hydraulics. It had to be made to flow away, continuously and reliably. In these pipes, we see the applied mind of a canal-building culture turning its expertise inward, on itself. They tamed great rivers to feed their fields, and they built tiny, ceramic rivers to carry away their pollution. Both acts were about control, about imposing a human order on natural flows. One created life, the other managed the unavoidable byproducts of that life. And both were built, in part, from the same humble, timeless material, the baked earth beneath their feet. The gentle, gravity-fed flow of the clay pipe system represents an ideal, a thread of order woven into the urban fabric. But that order had limits, and its failure had a grim, all-too-human cost. To understand the true stakes of Sumerian waste management, you must follow the path of that effluent not to the river, but into the body of a child. Leave the engineering marvels and step into a typical, crowded courtyard house. The air is close, shared by a family of 8 or 10. A toddler, just learning to walk, crawls across the packed earth floor. His hands, which will soon find his mouth, brush against the floor where ash was sprinkled to absorb moisture, where tiny, invisible fragments of waste from the soles of sandals have been tracked in. His family is careful, loving. But their world is a minefield of pathogens they cannot conceive of. The liquid waste that so elegantly flows through the pipes of the wealthy districts, in poorer areas, often ends up in open channels or shallow pits. Flies breed there in their millions. They land on the waste, then land on the food drying in the courtyard, on the rim of the water jar. The chain of contamination is short and brutally efficient. The result is what modern epidemiologists call fecal-oral diseases: dysentery, typhoid, cholera, and a host of parasitic infections like giardia. These are the silent, daily killers of ancient cities. They don't make the epic tales, they don't topple kings. They kill the youngest, the weakest, and they do it relentlessly, season after season. This is the profound health trade-off of urban life, the price of proximity. The city offered safety from human predators and access to economic opportunity, but it dramatically increased the risk of death by microscopic ones. This leads us to a mainstream, somber historical fact visible in Sumerian burial records and bone analysis: appallingly high infant and child mortality. It's estimated that in the ancient world, only about half of all children lived to see their 5th birthday. A significant portion of this death was due to waterborne and wasteborne diseases. The city, for all its wonders, was a demographic sink. Its population could only be maintained through a constant influx of people from the healthier, less dense countryside. The very structure that promised survival also guaranteed a certain rate of attrition, especially among the most vulnerable. The waste management system, for all its clever reuse and occasional engineering, was fundamentally losing the battle against the germs it helped to concentrate. Now, consider the adult experience. You live with chronic, low-grade gastrointestinal distress as a baseline. Occasional bouts of debilitating illness are a normal part of the annual cycle. Your life expectancy, if you survive childhood, might reach 40 or 50, but your body is worn down by a lifetime of subclinical infections and parasitic loads. This constant biological stress is the unseen backdrop to all of Sumerian history, to the labor that built the ziggurats, to the wars fought, to the poetry written. They achieved what they did not in spite of this burden, but while carrying it every single day. Their resilience is almost unimaginable. Historians still argue whether the Sumerians had any empirical understanding of the link between filth and disease. They clearly understood that bad smells, miasma, were associated with sickness, and they took steps to control odors, hence the sweeping, the ash, the desire to move waste away. But did they grasp the concept of invisible contagion carried by water or flies? Almost certainly not in a scientific sense. Their medical texts attribute sickness to demons, divine wrath, or imbalances in bodily fluids. Yet, their practical knowledge was profound. They knew that living next to a festering midden was unhealthy, that clean water tasted better and was safer, that separating waste from living spaces felt right. Their actions were often hygienic, even if their explanations were not. The quirky, fringe tidbit in this grim landscape is the use of beer as a safer hydration source. The fermentation process of their low-alcohol, porridge-like beer killed many waterborne pathogens. Drinking beer daily wasn't just for celebration. It was a practical, if unintentional, public health strategy. The city's waste might poison the water, but its grain could be transformed into a safer, if buzzier, alternative. So, in that dim courtyard, you watch the toddler put his hand in his mouth. It's an act of infinite normalcy and infinite risk. The love and care surrounding him are tangible, but the enemies are too small to see. This is the ultimate context for everything we've explored: the street paving, the middens, the drains, the grog. It was all an immense, collective effort to push back against this invisible tide, to create pockets of order in a world teeming with unseen threats. They fought with bricks, clay, and social custom, not with antibiotics or germ theory. They lost as often as they won. But they persisted, building their civilization on ground that was, in a very literal sense, toxic. Their story is not just one of ingenuity, but of survival in a world they only partially understood, a testament to the human ability to adapt, endure, and build beauty even on foundations laced with peril. The toddler fate is the sharpest lens through which to view the Sumerian city. It forces the final, synthesizing question. Knowing all this, the smells, the demons, the constant low-grade illness, the ever-present refuse, why did they stay? Why did anyone choose the crowded, messy, dangerous city over the cleaner, safer, more spacious countryside? The answer lies not in rejecting the mess, but in making a conscious, daily compromise. You, as a resident of Ur, didn't ignore the waste. You accepted it as the inevitable, tangible cost of a package of benefits that, on balance, was worth paying. You lived with the fringe, because the fringe was where the opportunities were. Think of the city as a deal. In return for tolerating the sheet trash underfoot and the miasma in the air, you received safety. The towering walls and the community of armed men meant safety from the marauders, rival city-states, and wild animals that threatened isolated farmsteads. Your family slept behind a barrier of mudbrick and human solidarity. Economic opportunity. Here were markets, workshops, and temples, places to sell your surplus grain, your pottery, your labor. You could be a porter, a scribe, a metalsmith, a baker. Social mobility, while limited, existed in a way it didn't on the farm. Community and culture. This was the hub of human connection. Festivals at the temple, gossip at the well, marriages, legal disputes in the city square. It was the place to hear the latest epic of Gilgamesh, to see new fashions, to be part of something larger than your kin group. Access to the divine. The home of the city's patron god was here. Proximity to the temple meant better access to divine favor, to oracles, and to the rituals that ensured the fertility of the land you might still farm outside the walls. This package was irresistible. The mess was the visible proof of the deal's other terms. The crowded streets proved you were not alone. The middens proved there was enough surplus to have waste. The complex smells proved a diverse economy was working. You didn't love the trash, but you understood it as the shadow cast by the very things that made your life viable and vibrant. This mainstream historical fact is at the core of urbanism. Cities have always been trade-offs. The Sumerians were simply the first to articulate that trade-off in mudbrick and pottery shards. They pioneered the urban psychological contract. Accept a certain level of collective disorder in exchange for collective strength. This acceptance required a specific mindset. It wasn't passive resignation, it was active compartmentalization. You could walk from your relatively clean, swept home, into the crunchy, refuse-paved street, to the immaculate temple courtyard, and back again, shifting your expectations and standards for each space seamlessly. Your brain held multiple definitions of clean simultaneously: ritually clean, domestically tidy, and public way functional. The ability to hold these conflicting realities without cognitive dissonance was a necessary skill for urban life. The waste wasn't out of sight, out of mind. It was in sight, but placed in a specific mental category that limited its psychological intrusion. Historians still argue whether this compromise was a stable equilibrium or a constant source of social tension. Did people grumble constantly about the filth, or did they genuinely not see it as a primary problem compared to threats like famine or invasion? The lack of texts complaining about garbage, they complain about taxes, corrupt officials, and noisy neighbors, suggests it was simply part of the background noise of existence. A solved problem in the sense that they had a set of adaptable, traditional ways of dealing with it. The compromise was baked into the culture. The quirky, fringe tidbit that embodies this is the concept of the city as a body. Some Mesopotamian texts metaphorically describe the city with organic terms: gates as mouths, streets as veins. If the city is a body, then its waste products are a natural, healthy sign of metabolism. Constipation, blocked drains, is an illness. A steady, managed flow is health. This metaphorical framing would have made the mess feel less like a failure and more like an intrinsic part of a living, breathing system. Their trash was the city's excrement, and a body that doesn't excrete is a dead body. So, as you prepare to take your final view of this ancient metropolis, you see it with new eyes. It is not a failed modern city, dirty and unmanaged. It is a stunningly successful ancient one, having solved the problem of collective life with the tools it had: social custom, material pragmatism, spiritual belief, and a hefty dose of tolerated mess. The ziggurat and the midden are not opposites, they are the two poles of the same reality. One reaches for transcendent order, the other grounds the city in the inescapable biology of its inhabitants. One is the dream, the other is the cost of the dream. And walking these streets, breathing this air, you understand that every person here has made their peace with that equation. They live with the fringe, because the center, with all its safety, opportunity, and divinity, is worth it. The compromise is made, the balance understood. Now, as the sun begins its long, slow descent over the plain of Sumer, casting the ziggurat's shadow like a giant sundial across the city, it's time for the final reckoning. Not with kings or gods, but with the legacy of the street itself. You've walked on it, seen it built, seen it cleaned. You've understood it as infrastructure, as resource, as threat. Now, see it as monument. For when the city of yore was finally abandoned, its walls crumbled, its temples fell to dust, and its people scattered to the winds, one thing remained, stubbornly testifying to its existence: the trash. Not the gold of the royal tombs, not the inscribed tablets of the scribes, but the humble, compacted, layered refuse of 5 millennia of daily life. It formed a great, silent hill, a tell, that would puzzle and then enlighten archaeologists thousands of years later. This is the ultimate irony and the profound truth. The Sumerians' most enduring monuments are not what they built up, but what they built out: the vast, stratified middens and the streets paved with their own consumption. The ziggurat of yore was rebuilt and buried. The palace was looted and eroded. But the trash mounds, like Tel Majnuna on the city's edge, grew steadily, faithfully recording each era in a language of pottery styles, animal bones, and lost objects. When Sir Leonard Woolley and other archaeologists sank their trenches into these mounds in the 20th century, they were not just digging through garbage. They were reading the most honest diary of the city ever kept. The grand inscriptions on stone boasted of conquests and divine favor. The trash layers whispered of diet, trade, domestic crafts, and daily hardship. They revealed the material truth beneath the ideological narrative. In those layers, the story of our journey is confirmed. The thick strata of crushed pottery speak to the endless cycle of use and reuse. The alternating layers of ash and organic matter tell of seasons of burning and dumping. The sudden appearance of exotic shells or distant stone tools in a layer marks a peak of trade. The bones show the ages of slaughtered animals, revealing periods of plenty and want. The very composition of the soil changes over time, holding chemical signatures of the waste that seeped into it. This mound is not a passive pile. It is the city's autobiography, written in broken things. It is the mainstream historical fact that underpins all modern understanding of Sumerian daily life, far more than any king list. The rulers wanted to be remembered for their glory. They are remembered, in large part, because of their subjects' garbage. As the last light fades, painting the tell in shades of ochre and deep purple, consider the final journey of the objects you've followed. That potsherd, tossed from a doorway, walked on for decades, then was crushed and incorporated into a street. Centuries later, that street became the foundation for a new house. When that house collapsed, the shard, now just a speck in the matrix, became part of the growing mound. There it lay, for 3,000 years, until a trowel gently scraped it free, and a human mind, separated by epochs, held it up to the light and understood a fragment of a life. The object's utility ended millennia ago, but its story never did. It waited, patient and silent, in the company of millions of other discarded fragments, for its meaning to be rediscovered. Historians still argue whether we can ever truly hear the voices of the common people from this material record, or if we are forever projecting our own narratives onto their silent leavings. But perhaps that's the point. The trash doesn't lie to flatter. It doesn't boast. It simply was. In its honest, uncurated totality, it offers a democracy of evidence that royal inscriptions never can. The quirky, final fringe tidbit is this: the very word Sumerian was lost to history for thousands of years, until those same archaeologists, sifting through the dust and debris, pieced their language back together from the very tablets often found in middens and the ruins of collapsed buildings. Their identity was literally resurrected from their garbage. Their lost civilization was found in its discard. So you stand at the base of the silent, sloping tell as the stars begin to prick the violet sky. The city is gone. The sounds are gone. The smells are long dissipated. All that remains is this hill, this mountain of memory made from broken plates and lost hopes. It is not a grave, but a testament. It says, we were here. We lived, we ate, we broke things, we threw them away, and we built our world on top of them. We were messy, ingenious, sick, resilient, and human. And in that, perhaps, lies the most profound connection across the gulf of time. They were not so different. They negotiated with their mess, just as we do. They found ways to live with it, to use it, to fear it, and to build upon it. Their solution was not to make it vanish, but to make it part of the landscape of their lives. And in doing so, they left behind, in the most unlikely of forms, a monument more enduring than stone, a mountain of humble, honest truth, waiting in the dark for the light of understanding to return. The stars are fully out now, a brilliant, unpolluted sprawl across the Mesopotamian night, the same stars they looked upon. The great tell is just a darker shadow against the land, sleeping. The frantic energy of the city, the clatter, the shouts, the smells, all have softened into a deep, immense silence. It's easy, from our world of instant disposal and hidden systems, to judge their mess, to see their solutions as primitive. But that misses the point entirely. They weren't failing to be us. They were succeeding spectacularly at being themselves, the pioneers of the crowded human experiment. They looked the problem of their own collective existence square in the face, without our technology, and they fashioned answers from clay, custom, and collective will. They accepted the fringe so they could thrive at the center. So let the images soften now. The potter's spinning wheel slows to a stop. The porter's cart rests in a courtyard. The temple sweeper lays down his broom. The child sleeps, safe for tonight. The intricate, noisy, smelly, glorious machine of the city winds down. There is no more problem to solve tonight, no more waste to sort. There is only the quiet evidence of a life fully, messily lived, settled into the earth. We walk away from the tell, not with a lesson about trash, but with a feeling, a sense of profound kinship. Their struggle for order in chaos is our struggle. Their compromise is our compromise. Their ingenuity echoes in our pipes and our recycling bins. They whisper to us not from palaces, but from the ground we all walk on, a ground made, in the end, of time and what we leave behind. So breathe deep, not the ancient air, but your own. Feel the weight of the covers, the safety of your walls, the quiet of your night. The journey is done. The past has told its story in fragments, and now it rests. Let your thoughts drift like ash on a gentle wind, settling into the peaceful, forgiving dark. Sleep now. The city dreams, and so can you.